The PlayStation 4 is nearly 10 years old and hasn't been the main Sony console being sold since late 2020, and yet, in spite of this, it's still near impossible to find its successor in the PlayStation 5. This means many of us are still using the PS4 right now, or might even be looking to buy one all these years later. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91Tech, and I'm going to cut straight to the chase, timestamps in the description if you would like to skip ahead. I don't believe the PS4 is worth buying right now, whether it be the original, Slim, or Pro, for one simple reason. The PS5, as hard as it is to find, is just going to be more worth it in nearly every scenario. While there may be deals here and there on the used market for the PS4, the PS5 is still the console to be looking at, even if it means you have to wait a good long while until you find one available. Plus, it can play pretty much any PS4 title. However, if you already own a PS4, you don't need to stress about upgrading just yet. If you have the money for a PS5, it's certainly worth keeping your eyes open in case one pops up in your area, but luckily, if you can't find one or don't really want to, you don't have to worry. Because stock for the PS5 is still scarce, the vast majority of new games coming out still support the PlayStation 4, including some of the latest and greatest of Sony exclusives, such as Horizon Forbidden West and Gran Turismo 7, along with upcoming titles like God of War Ragnarok. And on the non-exclusive side of things, you have games like Elden Ring, which runs on the PS4 at a reduced frame rate, but is a massive game, and it running on 2013 hardware is kind of a technical marvel. It isn't the best way to play it by any means, but it does perform much better than the base Xbox One, and a game like this is so good it is probably worth the lower quality graphics if you can't get your hands on next-gen hardware quite yet. In 2022, not only is the PS4 still a fully capable console, but it will likely remain this way for the next year or even two until the PS5 is finally common enough that developers shift over to solely making games for the newer hardware. This video is going to be mainly focused on the original PS4 and PS4 Slim, which are the same machine in technical capabilities, and I'll link in the description my recent video on the PS4 Pro if you'd like to go give it a watch. The Pro is a really nice compromise between the amazing graphical potential and performance of the newer consoles, while still being a last-gen system, making it kind of an ideal console to have right now if you can't scrounge up a PS5. But the PS4 and PS4 Slim can still more than do the job, as long as you're okay with running most games at 1080p with 30 frames per second. If you're someone who for some reason really wants to buy a PS4, well, Sony is still making them. At least allegedly. Why do I say allegedly? Well, I can't find them. While I can't say it's the case for everywhere because I am not everywhere, I did search a lot of retailers for the PS4 Slim and found barely anything. A friend of mine who lives elsewhere had a similar amount of luck. The only ones we were finding were either refurbished/used models off of GameStop or overpriced models from third parties selling through bigger retailers like Walmart. Yes, Walmart right now is asking for $550 for a PS4. Even Sony's own website doesn't have any stock. And so, I mean, if you have to go to this much trouble to find a brand new PS4, you might as well be looking for the PS5. It's a disgusting market right now, and unfortunately, if you need a console as soon as possible, you're going to have to turn to the used market. On eBay.com, the PS4 Slim is going refurbished for a bit over $300, and most used 1TB Slim models were going for around the same, which might not seem too bad, but keep in mind here that it's supposed to be selling for $299 brand new, never used whatsoever. Now, I was finding some models at around $200, a bit over sometimes, mostly the original model, and all about 500 gigs for that price. I really wouldn't buy that unless you're really desperate. 500 gigs will fill up very fast, and getting the original console, for example, which is approaching almost 10 years old now, while it might be running fine, you never know buying used, right? It's just not a good time to buy a PlayStation 4, and of course, I'm just looking at eBay. You can always check local marketplaces, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, you might find a better deal. It's worth looking into if you're desperate for a PlayStation, but overall, I have to recommend you do not buy one right now. It's hard to believe that this is the same system that could be found for like $200 on Black Friday a few years back, but here we are. And this is the big reasoning behind my assessment that it's just not worth buying anything but a PS5, and definitely don't get any console from a scalper. But if you already own a PS4, as many of you watching likely do, you're in a pretty good spot right now. In fact, you're in a very good spot right now as games just keep coming out for the older platform. This won't be changing anytime soon, and while there are a few PS5 exclusives, they're few and far between, and Sony themselves seems fairly dedicated to keeping it that way for the foreseeable future. So let's back up here a bit and look at the PS4 and PS4 Slim as is. How does it truly hold up in 2022? Well, honestly, it holds up much better than I think anyone would have expected back when they originally bought a PS4. For example, my family got this original PS4 for the Christmas of 2014, only about a year after its launch, and back then I definitely wouldn't have expected the system would still be playing nearly every game out there 8 years later. In fact, the majority of the gameplay you're seeing here has been played on my own PS4 specifically for this video, including Gran Turismo 7 and Elden Ring. And yeah, I bought Elden Ring again, even though I already had it on PC, purely to try it out on the PS4. And no regrets, it really is that great of a game. And it's nice to see it playing here, even if it's not fantastic. If this was your only way to play Elden Ring, it's definitely worth it. Not that this kind of game is for everyone, but having the option to play the newest games is huge. To quickly cover the online aspect of PlayStation Plus is required for playing games online, though there are exceptions with free-to-play titles like Fortnite, Apex, and Call of Duty Warzone. Even so, the majority of multiplayer titles require PS Plus, which will cost you at least $60 a year. Now, PS Plus is changing as of June 2022 to bring different tiers. The $60 one that is currently being sold will be PlayStation Plus Essential. For $100 a year, you've got PS Plus Extra, which gives a catalog of up to 400 PS4 and PS5 titles. And then there's PS Plus Premium, which will cost $120 a year and basically merge in PlayStation Now with Sony's streaming offerings, including PS3 games, along with various other benefits. PS Now is going the way of the dodo. It will no longer be around. There's definitely a market for this kind of thing, but having PS3 games only playable via streaming is a true pity, especially considering how on the Xbox side you've been able to play a huge catalog of games from both the first Xbox and 360 on their newest consoles for a very long time. And regardless, the whole new subscription plan doesn't come even close to matching the value of Xbox Game Pass. I won't go too much into that, but Microsoft has more money than Sony and can afford to take a loss. In spite of all this, Sony exclusives are the big reason many will stick with PlayStation, and in the very least when it comes to PS Plus, it's nice to have some more options for those who will be interested in this sort of thing. Moving back to gameplay, the overall experience can be a bit hit and miss with the PS4. Obviously, I've been fairly positive thus far and have really emphasized how great it is to be able to play the newest games out there, and that is pretty awesome for last-gen owners, but it is worth noting some games will make it feel its age more than others. Sony titles are generally a pretty safe bet. Gran Turismo 7, for example, runs at 1080p 60 frames per second, and it's a great looking game. And games that perform very poorly, like Cyberpunk 2077, typically garner enough of a negative reaction to make it obvious before you purchase the game, as long as you don't pre-order. I highly recommend avoiding pre-orders, especially if you're on a PS4, and before you buy a game, you should really probably look at reviews specifically geared towards the older consoles. As well, most games will target a pretty decent 1080p 30 frames per second. Some at launch, like Cyberpunk, will just end up being a terrible, buggy, and laggy mess. The PS4 Pro, like the Xbox One X on the Xbox side, is a lot better for this, but the base PS4 and Slim models are just straight up old in terms of hardware at this point, and definitely require some awareness for newer games releasing, as well as probably fairly low expectations. Digital Foundry is a great YouTube channel, and they give really in-depth analysis on performance. I highly recommend checking them out for the newest games releasing to see if they're up to par. All this being said, even with lesser graphical fidelity and lower frame rates, there's absolutely zero question that the PS4 can play some of the most breathtaking games from the past decade, whether it be as recent as this year, like the new Horizon game, to the early days of the PS4. Infamous Second Son, for example, is an early 2014 title, and it still looks pretty darn great. And I think it just goes to show how amazing this generation has been for graphics. And it's not like graphics are everything, because they're not. If the gameplay is fun, then graphics definitely take a backseat to that, and luckily the PS4 has tons of fun games, and a lot of them look really good too. And this console, with the proper optimization, seems to be capable of almost anything. It's easy to criticize it for only running 30 frames per second in most games nowadays, but considering that this at its core is a console with like mid-tier PC hardware from 2013, and it can still play games that look this good, that's kind of unbelievable, and developers deserve a lot of credit for making it work. One area in which the PS4 really struggles is going to be with load times, at least compared to the PS5. This is because it has a physical hard drive versus the SSD solid state drive on the PS5 that is much faster. The PS4 Pro also has an older hard drive, so that is just kind of a last generation thing at this point. And to be fair, it's not the most crucial element. All it really does is just take up some more of your time. At the end of the day, you can still play the games, and a lot of those games look amazing. What's almost as important as the games themselves is how you play them, and the PS4 experience is great with the now classic Dualshock 4 controller. I say classic because, well, it's the last of the Dualshock line. The Dualshock 4 has a built-in battery and charges with micro USB, and while the built-in battery is very convenient, making them non-replaceable does hurt the longevity of the controller. The original controllers I've had since 2014 don't seem to last for more than like an hour or two playing games, and there's really not a whole lot that can be done there besides just buying a new controller controller. Of course, you can play with them plugged in, but that's a pain. What I really dislike isn't the fault of the Dualshock 4, but Sony, and that's how you can't use newer DualSense PS5 controllers with your PS4. This seems like unnecessary gatekeeping to me, especially considering how you can play PS4 games on your PS5 with these DualSense controllers just fine. And it sucks because for those needing new controllers, it would make sense to start buying the newer ones for your inevitable eventual upgrade to the PS5. But nope, you have to spend the $60 on a DualShock 4 if you need a gamepad for your old PlayStation. Hey, at least those are readily in stock. Beyond the little complaints I have with the controller situation, I've always especially loved this red one I got for Christmas some years ago now. It served me really well. And hey, this original console that we got in 2014 is still kicking quite nicely too, running games like a champ with its measly 500GB hard drive and scratched up fingerprinty glossy plastic. Again, I pulled it out to play most of the games you've been seeing here. The only issue I've had with this console, and keep in mind it's been played in my family for, well, I guess 8 years now, is one that we've been experiencing for probably about 5 years, where the little foot under the eject button seems to be sensitive enough to cause the console to think I'm actually pushing the button at random times, thus randomly spitting out discs even when I'm playing the game. The easy fix here is just putting the console on a couple game cases with the foot floating in the middle so it can't be pushed in, but it's a very strange, annoying problem regardless. Definitely a design flaw, and at least this won't happen on the Slim as it has a physical push button that's facing upwards. The 2013 PS4 and 2016 Slim might only have a few years between them. The Slim definitely feels like the much nicer console. I actually might prefer the look of the original PS4, but the Slim brought a fully matte plastic, much like the PS3 Slim, and rounded corners, which gave it a more sleek look. The glossy plastic on the old PS4 tends to get fingerprints and scratches, as mentioned before, so removing it was probably the right way to go, and as the names imply, the Slim is indeed slimmer. Not by a massive margin, but it's definitely smaller. As far as performance goes, these consoles are identical, and the only real difference worth mentioning is the lack of an optical audio out on the PS4 Slim, which does seem to be an odd exclusion. Now, one thing I've always been disappointed by is the lack of 4K video output on the Slim. You can only output up to 1080p. The Xbox One S, when it came out, was the Slim equivalent to the Xbox One from 2013, and while it played games just as well as the older machine, it was actually able to output video in 4K. So for example, some apps like Netflix allow you to watch video in 4K if you have a 4K capable TV, but the PS4 Slim cannot do this. It's a small thing, and most people probably wouldn't care. I mean, most people probably aren't even paying for the 4K option on Netflix, but even so, it would have been nice to have here. The PS4 Pro is actually the only PS4 that can output 4K video, and beyond that, you would need to go to a PS5. Ultimately, while there's, I'm sure, a lot more we could talk about with the PS4, if I had to sum up how it stands in 2022, the PS4, besides having a huge library of games from the past decade, is still able to play the vast majority of new games coming out right now, and will likely continue to be able to do that for the next couple years. With the PS5 stock being as scarce as it is, the PS4's relevance isn't going away anytime soon. Devs don't want to limit their audience considering just how many PS4s are out there and how many active users are willing to buy those new games. You shouldn't ever buy the PS4 right now, with the exception being a deal that you deem solid. $200 is the most I'd pay personally, and hey, if a retailer near you actually does have it brand new, or the proper $300 price tag, while normally I would say the value of $300 isn't worth it when the PS5 digital edition is only $400 due to the reality of how difficult it is to actually find the new consoles, it probably could be worth it for you if you're desperate to get a Sony machine. Regardless, saving for a PS5 is going to be your best bet, and that applies to those of you who still own and are playing your PS4. You don't need to stress out yet about upgrading, but if you have the money, it's certainly not a bad idea to keep your eyes open for a PS5 and jump on it if the opportunity arises. And in the meantime, you can sit back, relax, and enjoy playing the latest and greatest titles releasing on your PS4, whether it be the original console manufactured back in 2013, a Slim made in 2016, or heck, even one made as recent as 2022. The PS4 has aged really well, in part because it was a great console, in part because the PS5 has had a rough launch, at least in terms of availability, but either way, the PS4 is set to remain relevant for the foreseeable future. And with that, I think we're right about done here. Hopefully this video helped you out, and if it did, or you found it interesting, maybe hit that like button, and consider subscribing if you're into tech. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Links to more of my console reviews are in the description below, but for now, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.